You are about to hear a brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas, a new translation by Sarah Gordons, narrated by Jason Mccoy. Popery truly displayed in its bloody colors, or a faithful narrative of the horrid and unexampled massacres, butcheries, and all manners of cruelties that hell and malice could invent, committed by the popish Spanish party on the inhabitants of West India, together with the devastations of several kingdoms in America by fire and sword, for the space of 42 years, from the time of its first discovery by them. Composed first in Spanish by Bartolome de las Casas, a bishop there, and eyewitness of most of these barbarous cruelties, afterward translated by him into Latin, then by other hands into High Dutch, Low Dutch, French, and now taught to speak modern English. The argument of the narrative, by way of preface to the reader. The reverend author of this compendious summary was Bartolome de las Casas alias Casas, a pious and religious person, as appears by his zealous transports in this narrative for promotion of the Christian faith. Elevated from a friar of the Dominican order to sit in the episcopal chair, who was frequently importuned by good and learned men, particularly historians, to publish this summary. This piece so prevailed him that he collected out of that copious history, which might and ought to be written on this subject, the contents of this concise treatise with intention to display unto the world the enormities and crimes of Spaniards committed in America during their residence there. The author found that no admonitions or reprehensions could operate upon or sink into the rocky-hearted tyrants in those occidental parts. Therefore, he took up a firm resolution, at around 50 years of age, to run the hazards and dangers by sea. Moreover, risk the long voyage into Spain to acquaint and certify the most illustrious Prince Philip, the son and heir of His Imperial Majesty Charles V of blessed memory, with the horrid crimes perpetrated in those countries, part whereof he had seen, and part heard from such as boasted of their wickedness. His Caesarian Majesty, moved with a tender and Christian compassion towards these inhabitants of the countries of America, languishing for want of redress, he called a council at Valladolid, Anno Dom 1542, consisting of learned and able men, in order to start the reformation of the West Indian government. It took such a course that from that time their tyranny and cruelty against those barbarians was somewhat repressed, and those nations in some measure delivered from that intolerable and more than Egyptian bondage, or at least the Spaniards' ill usage and treatment of the Americans, was alleviated and abated. This book, mostly historical, part typographical, was published first by the author in Spanish at such evil. After that, translated into Latin by himself, and in process of time into High Dutch, Low Dutch, French, and now English, which is the 6th language it has been taught to speak, that any one of what nation soever might in this narrative contemplate and see as in a mirror the dismal and pernicious fruits that attend unlimited and close-fisted avarice, and consequently learn to abhor and detest it, and therefore achieving the predominant and greatest motive to the commission of such inexpressible outrages as here in part are faintly, not fully represented, which sin the pagan Indians themselves did reprobate in the Spaniards with all detestation, ignominy, and disgrace. When they had taken some of them, they bound them by hand and foot, laid them on the ground. Furthermore, they then continued by pouring melted gold down their throats, cried out and called to them aloud in derision, "Yield, throw up thy gold, O Christian! Vomit and spew out the metal which has envenomed both body and soul, that hath stained and infected thy mind with desires and contrivances, and thy hands with commission of such matchless enormities." I will then discontinue this, being but an extract of what is in the prefatory part of the original. I earnestly beg and desire all men to be persuaded that this summary was not published upon any private design, sinister ends, or affection in favor or prejudice of any particular nation, but for the public emolument and advancement.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?